Tokyo, early morning, March 1945. The city lies beneath a fragile veil of smoke from earlier raids. Streets are quiet save for the distant rumble of military trucks and the occasional shout of air raid wardens. In the pale light of dawn, the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force prepares its fighters on the airfields around the city. Young pilots, barely out of training, check their Mitsubishi Zeros, their hands trembling slightly as they polish the familiar curves of the aircraft they have flown countless times before. Suddenly, a distant roar cuts through the morning calm. Engines unlike any they have faced before slice the sky, sleek, metallic, fast. American P-51 Mustangs, escorted by long-range bombers, approach Tokyo, glinting in the rising sun. The pilots glance at each other, a flicker of unease crossing their faces. These machines move faster, climb higher, and carry heavier firepower than anything they've known. What follows in the skies above Tokyo will shatter expectations, redefine the balance of air power, and leave even the most seasoned Japanese pilots shocked. The air war over Japan was about to change forever. By early 1945, the Pacific War had stretched Japan to its limits. Years of fierce battles, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, had drained its resources and tested the resolve of its military and civilian population alike. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had fought with determination, often displaying skill and courage beyond expectation, but attrition had begun to tell. Skilled pilots were now scarce, and many new recruits entered combat with limited training. Aircraft production lagged behind Allied needs, and the technological gap was widening. The skies over Japan had once been dominated by the nimble Mitsubishi Zero, a fighter revered for its agility and climb rate. Early in the war, Zeros had swept through the Pacific, outmatching American aircraft with ease. But by 1945, this advantage was eroding. Allied aircraft had evolved, integrating more powerful engines, heavier armor, and advanced weaponry. Japanese pilots were aware of these changes, yet few had encountered them directly over their homeland. Meanwhile, the United States had committed to an unprecedented bombing campaign. B-29 superfortresses capable of flying at altitudes above 30,000 feet now roamed the skies over Japanese cities. Initially, these raids faced minimal opposition as Japanese anti-aircraft defenses struggled to reach the high-flying bombers. But the U.S. military understood that escort fighters were essential to minimize losses and maximize damage. Enter the North American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang represented a leap in air combat capability. With its long-range fuel tanks, superior speed, and heavy armament, it was a machine designed not just to intercept, but to dominate. Unlike the Zero, which prioritized maneuverability at the expense of protection, the Mustang balanced agility with firepower and armor, capable of taking hits that would cripple lesser aircraft. Its Merlin engine provided speeds and climbing power that left Japanese pilots struggling to keep pace. Training for Japanese aviators had once emphasized dogfighting mastery, learning to exploit the lightweight design of their aircraft. Pilots practiced vertical maneuvers and sudden dives, confident that skill and reflexes would overcome technological limitations. But now, the calculus had changed. American tactics had evolved alongside technology. Long-range escorts allowed B-29s to strike deeper into Japanese territory while Mustangs engaged defenders before they could reach the bombers. The psychological impact on Japanese air crews was as critical as the physical challenge. Pilots had been trained to believe that skill could overcome nearly any obstacle. They were disciplined, committed, and often willing to take extraordinary risks. Yet the sight of fast-moving Mustangs streaking across the sky, seemingly untouchable, was unnerving. Reports filtered back to commanders describing aircraft that could outclimb, outturn, and outgun the revered Zeros. Confidence, which had once been a hallmark of the Japanese Air Force, began to waver. Tokyo itself had become a focal point for this changing air war. The city, dense with population and industry, was now under the threat of sustained aerial bombardment. Civilians had endured blackouts, fire drills, and the ever-present hum of distant bombers. Pilots stationed at airfields surrounding the capital understood the stakes. Failure to repel attackers meant destruction not just of military targets but of homes, workplaces, and lives. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily, particularly as the capabilities of enemy aircraft became increasingly apparent. By March 1945, a convergence of factors set the stage for the coming confrontation. Japan's Air Force faced dwindling resources, inexperienced recruits, and an enemy armed with machines far superior in speed and firepower. The B-29 raids were escalating in frequency and Intensity, and the P-51 Mustang had proven its ability to intercept and destroy enemy fighters with alarming efficiency. The stage was set for a dramatic clash in the skies over Tokyo, a clash that would expose the limits of Japanese air power and herald a new phase in the Pacific War. In this environment, every sortie carried heightened tension. Every pilot who took to the skies faced not just the mechanical challenge of combat, but the psychological reality of confronting an aircraft designed to outmatch them at every turn. The Mustang was not simply a new fighter, it was a symbol of the shifting balance of air supremacy in the Pacific, and for many Japanese aviators, the first harbinger of defeat in the war over their homeland. The dawn was breaking, yet the skies above Tokyo were growing darker with the approach of American forces, and in that tension, the stage was quietly set for moments that would shock even the most experienced Japanese pilots. As the weeks passed into March and April 1945, the strategic bombing campaign over Japan intensified. The B-29 superfortresses, launched from bases in the Mariana Islands, conducted high-altitude raids across major cities, including Tokyo, Yokohama, and Osaka. These raids were designed not only to destroy industrial capacity but also to undermine civilian morale, forcing Japan closer to surrender. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy scrambled to respond, but their defenses were increasingly stretched thin. Anti-aircraft artillery, once formidable, struggled to reach the high-flying bombers, and available fighter aircraft could only engage the enemy for brief periods before fuel limitations forced a return to base. It was in this context that the North American P-51 Mustang emerged as a game-changing force. Unlike earlier American fighters, the Mustang could escort bombers all the way from the Marianas to the heart of Japan, providing protection at the exact moment Japanese pilots were most vulnerable. Its speed and firepower allowed it to engage the Zero fighters effectively, turning what had once been a defensive scramble into a fight on American terms. Japanese pilots quickly realized that their traditional tactics, relying on agility and surprise, were no longer sufficient. Mustangs climbed faster, dove harder, and fired with a steadiness that left the agile Zeros exposed. Encounters between the two sides quickly revealed the stark contrast in technology. Japanese reports described Mustangs as ghosts in the sky, appearing suddenly, striking with precision, and vanishing before retaliation could be mounted. Pilots noted the unusual speed and maneuverability of the American fighters, coupled with heavy firepower that could destroy a Zero with a single well-placed burst. In some cases, Japanese airmen attempted to coordinate group attacks, hoping to overwhelm the Mustangs with numbers. Yet even in larger formations, they struggled to land decisive hits. The Mustang's combination of speed, armor, and firepower had effectively rewritten the rules of air combat over Japan. The impact was not limited to physical engagements. Japanese commanders, once confident in their air superiority, faced difficult decisions. Should they continue aggressive intercept missions, risking pilots and aircraft, or conserve forces for what remained of the home island's defense? Intelligence reports confirmed increasing losses among even experienced pilots. Morale among younger aviators, already fragile due to limited training and combat experience, began to falter. Stories spread of Mustangs' outmaneuveries, seasoned Zeros, leaving even veteran pilots shocked at the disparity. At the same time, American pilots gained critical experience. Flying long sorties over Japan, they honed tactics for engaging the Zero under real combat conditions. Mustang pilots learned to exploit speed and altitude advantages, attacking from above and behind, minimizing exposure to defensive fire. Communication and coordination among units improved with each mission, gradually transforming the Mustangs from a technological novelty into a decisive instrument of air dominance. Meanwhile, the civilian population of Tokyo witnessed the growing intensity of the air war. Even as firebombing destroyed sections of the city, news of air combat filtered through newspapers and official broadcasts. The presence of highly effective American fighters capable of striking with impunity became a source of fear and anxiety. Rumors circulated about the invincibility of these aircraft, adding psychological weight to the physical devastation already inflicted by bombers. The Japanese military attempted to adapt. Pilots were trained to anticipate Mustang tactics, to coordinate in formations that could counter speed and firepower, and to rely on camouflage and evasive maneuvers. Engineers experimented with new weaponry and modifications, seeking an edge in aircraft design. But these efforts were limited by time, resources, and the growing technological gap. The Mustang was a product of years of research and industrial capacity that Japan could no longer match in the final months of the war. By late spring 1945, the presence of P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo had become a defining feature of the air war. The Mustangs' ability to escort B-29s deep into Japanese territory ensured higher bomber survival rates, increased pressure on Japan's industrial centers, and forced Japanese air units into a defensive posture they had not anticipated. Encounters over the capital shifted from sporadic skirmishes to sustained battles, with Japanese pilots increasingly on the defensive and Americans controlling the terms of engagement. The psychological shock of facing Mustangs had a lasting effect. Pilots who had once believed in the invincibility of the Zero now confronted a reality where skill alone could not guarantee survival. The technological superiority of the Mustang, combined with disciplined tactics and experienced pilots, created a sense of inevitability. Japan's air defenses were losing, and the war above its cities was tilting irreversibly toward the Allies. Amid this tension, every sortie carried high stakes. For the young Japanese pilots stationed at airfields around Tokyo, the approach of a Mustang formation meant not only a test of skill but also a confrontation with the limits of their training, aircraft, and collective morale. And for the American pilots, each engagement over Japanese skies confirmed the Mustang's role as a decisive tool of air power. An instrument that would secure the survival of bombers, amplify destruction on the ground, and alter the trajectory of the Pacific War. This escalation set the stage for multiple perspectives on the conflict: the human fear and resilience of Japanese pilots, the strategic genius of American air planning, and the technological revolution embodied in the Mustang. Each angle would reveal a deeper understanding of why the skies over Tokyo in 1945 became a theater of shock, adaptation, and irreversible change. The first encounter with the P-51 Mustang left many Japanese pilots in disbelief. Pilots who had trained for months, even years, in the art of dogfighting now faced aircraft that moved faster, climbed higher, and struck with deadly precision. Accounts from survivors described the sudden realization that their beloved Zeros were no longer supreme. A veteran pilot stationed near Tokyo recalled the first Mustang sighting as a moment of utter disbelief. It appeared out of nowhere, faster than anything I had ever flown. My hands shook, and for a second I could only watch. Fear and confusion spread among young recruits. Training emphasized confidence, reflexes, and courage, yet the Mustang demanded a new kind of respect. A recognition that skill alone could not ensure survival. Even experienced pilots familiar with American aircraft were unprepared for the Mustang's combination of speed and firepower. Each sortie became a psychological trial, with pilots questioning not just their tactics, but their very role in defending their homeland. The human cost of technological disparity weighed heavily, creating tension that affected coordination, decision-making, and morale. In the air over Tokyo, courage alone was no longer enough. Pilots faced an opponent that forced adaptation under extreme pressure, leaving a lasting mark on their perception of aerial combat. The introduction of the Mustang transformed Japanese air tactics almost overnight. Previously, dogfighting emphasized maneuverability and surprise. Zeros relied on tight turns, rapid climbs, and coordinated attacks in small formations. But against the Mustang, these tactics proved insufficient. American pilots exploited speed and altitude, diving from above, strafing with concentrated bursts, and retreating before Japanese fighters could respond. Japanese commanders experimented with group tactics, attempting to overwhelm the Mustangs through coordinated waves of fighters. Yet even in larger formations, they struggled to gain the upper hand. Escort missions now forced the Japanese into defensive operations rather than offensive sorties. Anti-bomber patrols had to account for Mustang coverage, complicating planning and stretching limited resources. Some units attempted nighttime interception or ambushes, hoping to exploit low visibility, but the Mustang's versatility made such tactics risky. Every mission demanded split-second decision-making, as the balance of power had shifted decisively. The tactical lesson was clear: traditional strategies were no longer effective, and adaptation was not merely desirable. It was essential for survival in the skies over Japan. The P-51 Mustang represented a technological leap that Japan struggled to match. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine allowed speeds exceeding 430 miles per hour, far faster than the Zero. Armored plating protected critical components, while 650 caliber machine guns delivered firepower capable of destroying an enemy aircraft with a single burst. In contrast, the Zero prioritized agility over protection, leaving pilots exposed to even minor hits. Fuel efficiency and long-range capabilities enabled Mustangs to escort bombers all the way to Japanese cities, something Japanese fighters could never achieve. Pilots observed the Mustang's ability to climb rapidly, execute high-speed dives, and maintain stability while firing, a combination that gave American pilots both offensive and defensive advantages. Japanese reports described the frustration of chasing Mustangs only to find them accelerating beyond reach, executing maneuvers impossible in a zero. Technology dictated the rhythm of combat. Where pilots once relied on skill alone, now aircraft performance determined engagement outcome. The Mustang was not simply an enemy fighter, it was a symbol of industrial might and technological innovation, demonstrating how material superiority could redefine the skies. Japanese commanders faced unprecedented dilemmas. The Mustang's arrival exposed vulnerabilities in air defense and forced leaders to reconsider mission priorities. Orders had to balance defending cities, intercepting bombers, and conserving aircraft and trained pilots for future battles. Some commanders advocated aggressive engagement to maintain morale, risking significant losses in the process. Others prioritized survival, directing pilots to avoid Mustangs and focus on escorting remaining forces or defending critical infrastructure. Strategic reports highlighted declining pilot experience and high attrition rates, forcing difficult calculations about the value of each sortie. Leaders also grappled with intelligence challenges, identifying Mustang tactics, predicting routes, and coordinating with anti-aircraft units. Decisions were complicated by the psychological impact of repeated losses. The presence of Mustangs created a scenario where every choice carried weighty consequences. Leadership became less about directing attacks and more about managing risk under extreme pressure. The result was a constant tension between the desire to fight, the need to protect, and the recognition that Japan's air supremacy had been irrevocably challenged. For American pilots, flying Mustangs over Tokyo was both exhilarating and perilous. Long-range escort missions required precision, endurance, and constant vigilance. Pilots had to navigate over thousands of miles of open ocean, then engage in combat against highly skilled adversaries defending their homeland. Reports from U.S. fighter groups describe initial uncertainty about Japanese tactics and the capabilities of their aircraft. Early encounters with Zeros revealed the traditional agility and evasive maneuvers of Japanese pilots, but the Mustang's superior speed and firepower quickly turned the tables. Pilots adapted to combat conditions, learning to approach from advantageous altitudes, strike with coordinated bursts, and disengage safely. Despite the technological edge, missions were not without risk. Anti-aircraft fire from the ground, combined with determined Japanese resistance, made each sortie a high-stakes challenge. Yet the morale among American pilots grew with each successful mission. They witnessed firsthand how the Mustang's capabilities transformed the dynamics of air combat, allowing bombers to reach their targets with higher survival rates. In letters and reports, pilots noted the psychological impact on Japanese defenders, describing wide-eyed opponents forced into defensive maneuvers and surprised by the Mustang's speed and firepower. From the American perspective, the Mustang was more than an aircraft. It was a strategic tool that redefined operational possibilities over enemy territory. The appearance of P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo had effects beyond the tactical and technological. It challenged the perception of invincibility that had been cultivated among Japanese pilots and civilians alike. Stories of rapid, lethal strikes circulated through airfields, creating fear and uncertainty. Propaganda, which once glorified the Zero as the supreme fighter, struggled to keep pace with reality. Civilians, too, felt the shifting balance. Each Mustang sighting suggested that Japan's cities were increasingly vulnerable, intensifying the sense of helplessness already caused by B-29 raids. Pilots described the emotional strain of knowing their aircraft could be destroyed almost instantly, while leadership contended with the weight of maintaining morale despite overwhelming odds. Families of aviators lived with anxiety, aware that the newest American fighters represented a lethal advantage. In this sense, the Mustang functioned not only as a weapon of destruction but also as an instrument of psychological warfare. Its mere presence conveyed inevitability, undermining confidence and shaping decisions both in the air and on the ground. By instilling fear and forcing adaptation, the Mustang reshaped the human dimension of conflict, illustrating that technological superiority often carries moral and emotional consequences alongside physical ones. Encounters with the Mustang also forced the Japanese military to reconsider broader air strategy. Commanders analyzed sorties, studied Mustang performance, and attempted adjustments such as altered formations, increased coordination, and revised engagement rules. Yet limited resources, lack of advanced aircraft, and pilot inexperience restricted effective implementation. The Mustang's presence highlighted the critical importance of long-range escort fighters in modern warfare and underscored the role of technology in dictating tactical possibilities. By forcing Japan into a defensive posture and exposing weaknesses in strategy, the Mustang set new benchmarks for air combat planning. These lessons would later inform post-war aviation strategy and serve as a historical case study in how innovation and adaptation intersect under the pressures of war. The skies over Tokyo in late March 1945 became the proving ground for the P-51 Mustang's dominance. On March 9th, U.S. Bomber Command initiated a large-scale raid, sending dozens of B-29 superfortresses toward the city. Their objective was to cripple industrial infrastructure and weaken morale. Japanese airfields scrambled fighters to intercept, primarily Mitsubishi Zeros, and a handful of newer Ki-84 Hayata aircraft. What unfolded was unlike any previous engagement. The Mustangs, flying long-range escort from the Marianas, intercepted Japanese formations well before the bombers reached the city. Pilots reported seeing the defenders maneuver desperately, attempting to climb and turn against an enemy that maintained speed, altitude, and fire superiority. Captain Richard Dick Bong, among the experienced American pilots, recalled the operation as a demonstration of the Mustang's unmatched capability. The aircraft could strike from above with lethal accuracy and disengage without sustaining damage. The Japanese pilots, in contrast, were forced into a reactive stance, responding to attacks rather than initiating them. One notable encounter occurred over the outskirts of Tokyo. A flight of 8 Zeros attempted to intercept a group of 10 Mustangs escorting bombers. The Mustangs held altitude advantage, diving in precise, coordinated attacks. Within minutes, 3 Zeros were destroyed and 2 more damaged. Pilots described the shock of watching their aircraft, once symbols of Japanese air superiority, fall before what seemed like effortless American precision. Those who survived reported a sudden awareness that the rules of engagement had shifted irrevocably. The Mustang's combination of speed, climb rate, and firepower disrupted the traditional dogfight. Japanese pilots, trained to exploit agility and tight maneuvers, found themselves unable to gain an advantage. High-speed dives and concentrated bursts left little opportunity for counterattack. Fuel limitations further constrained defensive maneuvers, as many pilots had to disengage early to avoid running out of gas over hostile territory. Commanders on the ground observed losses mounting, forcing emergency revisions to mission plans. Psychologically, the effect was profound. Young pilots reported a mixture of fear and awe. Even veterans admitted to being unprepared for the Mustang's performance. Diaries and post-war interviews highlight the growing realization that skill alone could no longer guarantee survival. One pilot wrote of his first encounter, "The Mustang moved like a shadow, striking before we could react. I had to break off and watch as my comrades were torn from the sky. It was terrifying and humbling." Such testimony underscored the human cost of technological disparity and the sense of shock spread across airfields and briefing rooms. The impact extended beyond immediate engagements. Japanese commanders reassessed defensive priorities, focusing on conserving experienced pilots and aircraft rather than risking them in futile attacks. Strategic adjustments included delaying intercepts, attempting ambushes at unexpected altitudes, and modifying formations. Yet these changes were reactive, unable to counter the Mustang's inherent advantages. The aircraft dictated the terms of combat, forcing the Japanese into a defensive posture over their own skies. At the same time, American pilots grew increasingly confident. Each successful escort reinforced tactical doctrines emphasizing altitude advantage, precision attacks, and coordinated teamwork. Mustang squadrons maintained cohesion, ensuring B-29s could strike targets with fewer losses. The aircraft's reliability and performance allowed commanders to plan deeper, riskier missions with greater confidence. By late March, the Mustang had proven itself a decisive factor in air superiority over Japan, changing the dynamics of the Pacific Air War. The encounter on March 9th marked a turning point in multiple ways. First, it exposed the limits of Japanese aircraft and tactics, shattering the belief in zero invincibility. Second, it demonstrated that long-range escort fighters could protect bombers and dominate enemy skies. Third, it signaled a psychological shift. Japanese pilots, once confident, now confronted a tangible, almost insurmountable technological threat. For commanders, the event clarified the strategic necessity of preserving resources while adapting to an enemy that controlled the tempo in terms of engagement. As the B-29s continued their bombing run, escorted by Mustangs, the consequences of this engagement became clear. Tokyo's air defenses were no longer sufficient to contest the skies effectively. The combination of American air power and technological superiority ensured that Japanese pilots were reacting to an enemy whose capabilities exceeded their own. Losses mounted, morale declined, and the perception of air dominance, once taken for granted, shifted irreversibly. In the wake of this battle, reports circulated detailing the Mustang's performance: climbs faster than any Japanese fighter, precise firing systems, and an ability to sustain combat without significant mechanical strain. Pilots who survived the encounters conveyed their shock, emphasizing the difficulty of mounting an effective counterattack. Even in isolated engagements, the Mustang's presence forced Japanese formations to adapt or retreat, reinforcing the notion that the balance of air power had decisively tilted. By the end of March, over Tokyo and its surrounding airspace, the P-51 Mustang had asserted itself as the dominant force. The combination of technological innovation, tactical application, and pilot skill created a scenario where Japanese air defenses were struggling to respond effectively. The event signaled more than a battle won. It marked the emergence of a new paradigm in aerial warfare, one defined by speed, firepower, and operational reach. The stage was now set for the continuing escalation of Mustang dominance, a relentless pressure that would shape the final months of the Pacific War. The confrontation over Tokyo had revealed not only the limits of Japanese air power, but also the transformative potential of advanced technology applied with strategy and precision. The following weeks only reinforced the Mustang's dominance over Japanese skies. In April 1945, coordinated raids became more frequent, each bringing new lessons and mounting losses for Japanese air units. On April 12th, a large-scale interception over Tokyo brought these dynamics into sharp focus. A formation of 30 B-29s, escorted by 20 P-51 Mustangs, was spotted by Japanese radar. Within minutes, over 20 Zeros and a handful of Ki-84s took to the air, determined to repel the strike. From the outset, the Mustangs dictated the pace. American pilots maintained altitude advantage, diving onto the Japanese formations with precision. Communication between Mustang flights ensured coordinated attacks, isolating smaller groups of defenders and eliminating them efficiently. Within 20 minutes, several Zeros were downed, forcing survivors to scatter in disarray. Ground observers counted more than a dozen aircraft destroyed, with additional units damaged or forced to land prematurely. Pilots described the experience as disorienting. The Mustang seemed to appear and disappear at will, striking with lethal accuracy and vanishing before counters could be mounted. The impact on morale was immediate. Japanese pilots were forced into defensive maneuvers they had never practiced on this scale. Younger pilots in particular struggled to maintain formation under the pressure of rapid Mustang attacks. Even seasoned aviators admitted the difference in aircraft performance was overwhelming. Reports from squadron leaders described the psychological toll: fear, hesitation, and a growing recognition that survival depended on avoiding, rather than confronting, the enemy. The Mustang's effect extended beyond individual dogfights. Each successful escort improved bomber survivability, enabling more destructive raids on Tokyo and other urban centers. Firebombing campaigns, previously hampered by fighter losses, now proceeded with greater efficiency. The Japanese command faced a dual challenge: protecting cities from strategic bombing while managing the attrition of its air force. Every sortie carried high stakes, and every engagement underscored the widening technological gap between the two sides. By mid-April, tactical adaptations by Japanese forces had limited impact. Pilots attempted to lure Mustangs into traps, varying altitudes, and attack vectors, but the superior speed, climb rate, and firepower of the Mustang consistently outmatched their efforts. Even aircraft designed to rival the Zero, such as the Ki-84, struggled to achieve parity. The combination of Mustang performance and American pilot skill ensured that Japanese forces could rarely seize the initiative. Individual accounts illustrate the intensity of these encounters. One pilot, forced into a high-speed evasive dive, recounted, "I could see the Mustang on my tail, its guns blazing. Every instinct told me to climb, to turn, to fight, but it was faster than I could react. I barely escaped with my aircraft intact. Stories like this became commonplace, demonstrating how quickly the balance of air power had shifted. Survival often depended on luck, awareness, and the ability to avoid confrontation altogether. The psychological implications were equally significant at command level. Japanese leaders recognized that continued losses would rapidly deplete their already limited pool of trained pilots. Decisions became reactive. Send out small, cautious groups, conserve fuel, or allow bombers to pass unchallenged. The Mustang had effectively forced Japanese commanders to adapt their strategy around a weapon they could neither match nor counter decisively. These confrontations over Tokyo in April 1945 marked a turning point not just in tactics but in the broader air war. The Mustang demonstrated that technological superiority, applied with disciplined training and coordinated tactics, could achieve both strategic and psychological dominance. Japanese pilots, once confident in the Zero's capabilities, were now confronted with the harsh reality of a foe they could neither outmaneuver nor outgun. The momentum had shifted, and the Japanese Air Force was increasingly defensive, reacting to Mustang attacks rather than shaping engagements. As the month progressed, Mustang escort missions continued without interruption. B-29 raids inflicted greater destruction on Tokyo, and Japanese air defenses, increasingly demoralized and exhausted, struggled to mount effective resistance. Ground crews repaired damaged aircraft under immense pressure, but replacements could not match the speed or skill of American operations. Each engagement reinforced the perception that the Mustang was an instrument of inevitability, shaping both the physical and psychological landscape of aerial warfare. The culmination of these engagements underscored a broader lesson. Air superiority depended not only on numbers and courage, but on technological innovation and operational integration. The P-51 Mustang, with its long-range capabilities, superior speed, and devastating firepower, exemplified this principle. In the skies over Tokyo, it became clear that the balance of air power had irrevocably shifted. Japanese pilots, commanders, and civilians alike confronted a new reality, one in which their ability to influence the course of aerial combat was sharply diminished. By the end of April 1945, the Mustang's impact was undeniable. Japanese fighter forces were depleted, morale had suffered severe setbacks, and the strategic advantage had swung decisively to the Allies. The air war over Tokyo had transformed from a contest of skill and bravery into a demonstration of technological dominance. The Mustang had not merely participated in combat, it had defined the outcome, establishing itself as the decisive factor in Japan's aerial defense. In this decisive phase, the stage was set for the aftermath. The collapse of Japanese air resistance, the acceleration of bombing effectiveness, and the final erosion of Japan's capacity to defend its skies. The Mustang's legacy was already written in the losses it inflicted, the morale it undermined, and the transformation it brought to the Pacific Air War. By May 1945, the consequences of Mustang dominance over Tokyo's skies were evident. Japanese air forces had suffered heavy losses both in aircraft and in trained pilots. Squadrons that once fielded dozens of Zeros now struggled to assemble sufficient numbers for even small interception missions. Replacement aircraft were scarce, and experienced aviators were irreplaceable. The attrition rate among pilots reached alarming levels, with many young recruits forced into combat with minimal preparation. The human cost was staggering, and the psychological burden compounded operational difficulties. Pilots who survived initial encounters with Mustangs often hesitated in subsequent sorties, fearing the unmatched speed, firepower, and precision of the American fighters. This hesitation, though natural, weakened Japanese effectiveness in defending against B-29 raids, creating a cascading effect on morale and strategy. Statistical reports from Japanese air units highlight the scale of losses. In a single month of sustained raids, more than 30% of defending aircraft were destroyed or severely damaged. Pilot casualties mirrored these figures, further diminishing the experience level within remaining squadrons. Ground crews labored to repair and maintain the dwindling number of functional aircraft, but the industrial strain and resource shortages limited their success. By late May, Japanese air forces were largely on the defensive, no longer capable of launching coordinated attacks that could challenge the Mustang-escorted bombers. The Mustang's effectiveness also manifested in improved survivability for B-29 missions. American bombers, previously vulnerable to interception, experienced fewer losses when escorted by P-51 squadrons. Pilots reported that Mustangs successfully engaged multiple enemy aircraft before they could reach the bomber formations, reducing damage and allowing missions to continue with higher success rates. The combination of offensive capability and defensive coverage ensured that strategic objectives, industrial destruction, infrastructure disruption, and civilian morale pressure, were achieved more efficiently than ever before. Japanese command recognized that conventional defensive tactics were insufficient. The speed and firepower of the Mustang forced a re-evaluation of engagement strategies. Some commanders advocated avoiding direct confrontation with Mustangs, instead focusing on low-altitude ambushes or night operations. Others attempted to concentrate remaining forces into larger formations to overwhelm American fighters, but the losses incurred in these experiments were often catastrophic. The technological disparity had created a situation where strategic innovation was constrained by the inability to match performance in real-time engagements. Beyond tactical and operational consequences, the Mustang's presence had a profound psychological impact on Japanese pilots. Letters and memoirs from surviving aviators reveal fear, frustration, and growing awareness of the technological gap. Many expressed a sense of inevitability. No matter their skill or bravery, survival depended on avoiding the enemy rather than confronting it. This psychological shift influenced every aspect of air operations, from mission planning to individual decision-making in combat. The Mustang had imposed not only physical dominance but also a mental one, shaping behavior and strategy across the Japanese Air Force. Civilians, too, experienced the effects indirectly. As B-29 raids became more effective due to Mustang escorts, Tokyo and other urban centers faced escalating destruction. Firebombing campaigns devastated industrial districts, residential areas, and transportation networks. Civilian casualties mounted, and the constant presence of American bomber, as accompanied by Mustangs, heightened anxiety and fear. Propaganda that had previously celebrated Japanese air superiority struggled to maintain credibility in the face of repeated high-profile losses. The combination of physical destruction and psychological pressure contributed to a growing sense of vulnerability across the population. The aftermath also highlighted the organizational and technological lessons learned by the U.S. Air Force. The P-51 Mustang had demonstrated the strategic value of long-range escort fighters capable of maintaining air superiority over enemy territory. Its performance validated years of investment in research, design, and pilot training. The success of the Mustang program reinforced the concept that air power depended on a combination of advanced technology, skilled personnel, and coordinated tactics. These lessons would influence future air combat doctrines, emphasizing the integration of speed, firepower, and operational range as essential elements of dominance. By the close of May 1945, Japanese air resistance over Tokyo had reached a critical low point. While small groups of Zeros and Ki-84s continued to fly missions, their effectiveness was severely diminished. Mustang escorts had secured the skies, allowing B-29s to carry out their objectives with unprecedented efficiency. Losses were no longer limited to aircraft. The erosion of experienced personnel, declining morale, and psychological fatigue left Japan ill-equipped to respond to the accelerating pace of the bombing campaign. The first stage of the aftermath was clear. The Mustang had not only inflicted immediate damage but had also set in motion systemic consequences that reshaped the air war. Japanese air power had been tested, broken, and forced into a defensive posture, while American capabilities, both technological and operational, had proven decisive. The dominance of the Mustang ensured that subsequent raids could proceed with greater precision and reduced risk, amplifying both physical and psychological pressure on Japan. In this period, the stage was set for the final phase of Japanese air resistance. The cumulative effect of losses, morale decline, and technological inferiority would define the closing months of the Pacific Air War. Mustang dominance had changed the rules of engagement permanently, signaling the impending collapse of Japanese defensive air operations and paving the way for the inevitable conclusion of sustained strategic bombing campaigns. As the bombing campaign progressed into June 1945, the full scale of Mustang influence over Japanese air operations became undeniable. Japanese air units had been reduced to a fraction of their former strength. Experienced pilots were exhausted or lost, and replacement aviators lacked sufficient training to confront the increasingly sophisticated American tactics. The Mustang had not only decimated aircraft but had systematically dismantled the confidence and effectiveness of Japanese forces. Pilots who remained often flew defensively, prioritizing survival over engagement, while commanders struggled to allocate diminishing resources strategically. The balance of power in the air had shifted decisively, leaving Japan with few options to contest Allied supremacy. Strategically, the Mustang's dominance amplified the effectiveness of B-29 raids. Cities including Tokyo, Yokohama, and Nagoya experienced devastating firebombing campaigns. As bomber formations penetrated deeper into urban areas with reduced losses. Mustangs intercepted and neutralized any Japanese fighter that attempted to engage the bombers, ensuring that the destruction of industrial facilities, transportation networks, and civilian infrastructure proceeded with minimal disruption. Reports from U.S. mission debriefs confirmed a sharp decline in bomber casualties when Mustangs were present, validating their role as a critical component of strategic air power. The integration of long-range fighters with bomber formations had achieved a decisive operational synergy, reshaping the rules of aerial warfare over Japan. On the ground, the psychological impact on the Japanese population intensified. Continuous air raids, now executed with near impunity, created an atmosphere of fear and helplessness. Civilians were acutely aware that the air defense they had relied upon was no longer capable of ensuring safety. Propaganda touting Japanese air superiority lost credibility as news of repeated failures filtered through official channels and personal accounts. The appearance of Mustangs over cities became a symbol of vulnerability, reminding civilians that industrial capacity, homes, and lives were exposed to relentless aerial assault. This constant pressure eroded morale and contributed to the broader sense of inevitability regarding Japan's declining position in the war. Japanese command attempted measures to adapt. Limited numbers of Zeros and Ki-84s were reorganized into specialized intercept units, and pilots were instructed to focus on ambushes or low-altitude attacks where Mustangs were less effective. Some sorties targeted Mustangs directly, aiming to diminish their escort coverage for B-29 formations. However, these strategies met with limited success. The superior speed, armament, and tactical coordination of Mustang squadrons consistently countered Japanese efforts. Engagements increasingly favored the Americans, and any tactical victories for Japanese pilots were isolated and temporary. The cumulative effect reinforced a harsh reality. Technological and operational superiority, not bravery or numbers alone, determined outcomes in modern air combat. Losses among Japanese air forces continued to mount. Statistical records from late spring 1945 indicate that over 40% of fighter aircraft assigned to Tokyo's air defense were destroyed or rendered unserviceable within weeks. Pilot attrition rates mirrored this trend, with many surviving only due to luck or skillful evasive action. Morale deteriorated rapidly. Surviving aviators expressed frustration and despair in letters and post-war memoirs. One pilot wrote, "No matter how we turned, how we dived, or how we climbed, the Mustangs were always ahead. We had nothing to match them, and we knew it." Such reflections illustrate the combined physical and psychological toll imposed by a technologically superior opponent operating with disciplined strategy. The Mustang's dominance also forced a reallocation of Japanese defensive priorities. Commanders had to weigh the loss of aircraft and pilots against the need to protect cities from strategic bombing. Defensive sorties became smaller and more cautious, focusing on interception only when conditions seemed favorable. Some units withdrew entirely from direct engagement to preserve their limited strength. In practical terms, this shift left much of Japan's industrial and urban infrastructure increasingly exposed to air raids. The operational consequences were immediate. Bombing campaigns proceeded with growing efficiency, destruction increased, and the effectiveness of Japan's defensive air operating ONs steadily declined. By July 1945, the consequences of Mustang superiority were fully realized. Japanese air forces were no longer capable of contesting the skies effectively over major cities. The combination of technological disparity, pilot attrition, and declining morale had created an insurmountable barrier. Mustangs and B-29s operated with relative impunity, inflicting widespread damage that further strained Japan's already stretched resources. Commanders recognized the futility of continued engagement, and defensive operations were increasingly symbolic rather than strategically effective. The collapse of air resistance marked a turning point not only in the battle over Tokyo but in the broader trajectory of the Pacific War. In this context, the Mustang's legacy was clear. It had demonstrated that technological innovation, integrated with tactical expertise, could decisively shape the outcome of modern warfare. Its presence over Tokyo had altered the psychological landscape for both pilots and civilians, undermining morale while ensuring operational success. Beyond the immediate destruction, the Mustang reshaped Japanese perceptions of air combat, illustrating the decisive role of aircraft capable of combining speed, firepower, and endurance. The aftermath over Tokyo also signaled broader strategic consequences. With air superiority established, U.S. forces could intensify bombing campaigns without significant threat of interception. The destruction of industrial capacity combined with civilian demoralization accelerated Japan's decline and contributed to the conditions that would culminate in surrender. Mustang dominance was not a singular event but a sustained influence that redefined the conduct of aerial warfare, showcasing the intersection of technology, strategy, and human resilience under extreme conditions. By the end of this phase, Japan's air defenses had been effectively neutralized, civilian areas exposed, and strategic bombing achieved unprecedented efficiency. The Mustang had secured the skies, altered Japanese tactical doctrine, and underscored the transformative power of technology in modern conflict. The stage was now set for the final reflection on the broader implications of these events, the human, technological, and historical lessons emerging from the shock of P-51 Mustangs over Tokyo. The story of the P-51 Mustang over Tokyo is more than a tale of machines in combat. It is a study of transformation in warfare. In the skies above Japan, technology and strategy intersected in ways that reshaped human perception, morale, and operational possibilities. The Mustang was not merely faster or stronger than the Zero, it represented a shift in the very rules of aerial engagement. Skill and bravery, once the defining elements of dogfighting, were now measured against the reality of industrial innovation, long-range planning, and precision firepower. For Japanese pilots, the Mustang embodied both awe and fear. It challenged assumptions, disrupted training, and forced adaptation under extreme pressure. The psychological weight of confronting an opponent that could outclimb, outturn, and outgun them created a tension that influenced every mission. Civilians, witnessing the consequences of this technological dominance from the ground, experienced the fragility of life in a world where destruction could arrive from above with near impunity. From an Allied perspective, the Mustang demonstrated the strategic value of integrating technological superiority with disciplined tactics. It ensured the survival of bombers, amplified operational impact, and redefined cities. Had it meant to control the skies, the aircraft's effectiveness extended beyond mere physical victories. It shaped decisions, altered morale, and created the conditions for sustained operational advantage. Ultimately, the encounters over Tokyo illustrate a broader lesson in the evolution of warfare. Innovation, preparation, and adaptation are as critical as courage and determination. The Mustang's dominance forced a recalibration of expectations, highlighting that the trajectory of conflict is often determined as much by machines and strategy as by human skill alone. In the Pacific War's final months, it became clear that mastery of the sky could dictate the fate of cities, industries, and nations. The P-51 Mustang did not simply fight in the skies over Tokyo. It reshaped them. It left an enduring imprint on the history of air combat, a testament to the transformative power of technology and a reminder that even the most revered pilots must reckon with forces beyond individual skill. In the quiet that followed each raid, the legacy of these encounters lingered, etched into memory, strategy, and the history of modern warfare.